So just to give a bit of background to us as a business, UniPhi spun out of our parent company in 2012. It's a platform for portfolio program and project management, and so to emphasize on that platform element, it's a configured product that you tailor to your specific needs. Currently, we have 9,000 active users logging in daily. They're the active daily users, not the licensed users. It's considerably larger. And that's all around the world. Our focus has been ANZ, but we're now a global rollout business, and yeah, we've got people logging in from 30 different countries as we speak. Through that process, we're currently supporting in Australia and New Zealand around $31 billion in infrastructure spend. Obviously, governments are looking to fiscally pump prime their economies at the moment, so being able to support infrastructure is a good thing, and we've been able to get into some big programs over here. And obviously, it's also used in the built environment as well, and so millions more dollars are being managed on the building environment. This particular presentation, though, leverages off a large program that we did in Sydney. The program's called Easing Sydney Congestion, and which is optimistic in its naming at least. It's made up of a number of sub-programs and then phased projects underneath. It's a considerable number of projects, smaller sort of projects based around clearways, bus lanes, pinch point relief, and some other projects. So those programs make up $4.2 billion in spend over a period of time. And the complexity that came into that program wasn't the scale of each individual project, was the number of them. The fact that they weren't identified up front, they were emerged over time. So the program actually went from, each project had its initiation and feasibility phase through to concept, detailed design, and then delivery. So the program was emerging, and it still is emerging. It's an ongoing program, and so projects are still being identified. All of the projects identified are on brownfield sites, so that had to deal with existing infrastructure, stakeholders, disrupting the flow of traffic, disrupting the neighbourhood, all that sort of issues that you have to deal with when you're upgrading an existing facility. And so these complexities, are always challenging. And what we brought to the table in that environment was a distributed data capture model. So UniPhi is a web-based platform, has mobile app interfaces and a bunch of other interfaces into email and other tools like Excel and the like. And so what we want to do is capture data and unify that data from a number of different sources, including our own interfaces. By capturing as much information as we can live and supporting the people who are delivering the project, not just the management of that delivery, we feel we can get a richer source of information and therefore more control. So within that distributed data capture, what we were looking to do was support the activity, the actual day-to-day activity, whether it is in the investigation stage, the design stage, or in the delivery stage. And what we believe that gives us is a lot of transparency for management on a day-to-day basis, but also we're looking at the implications from a machine learning, artificial intelligence sense, where you can get large data sets and start to develop some pattern matching and other type of algorithm to see if you can give early warnings and heads up to those program managers on things they may not have picked up on using traditional techniques of meetings and general tacit knowledge. So this is the hypothesis as a visual. What we have is different interfaces, different data entry points. We've got a person in the field with a hard hat over here and entering data directly into our application through an on-site mobile application. We have the project manager, the designers working at their desks, possibly at home right now, but working at a laptop or a desktop and putting information directly into the application. And then we have interfaces between one system and another where we can pull that information as well. And by collecting these types of data into our application here, we then are able to get lovely little geeks here to interrogate that information using data analytic tools and also potentially AI intelligence, as I was mentioning before. So that's the hypothesis. That's what we were aiming to do. And so to demonstrate that in a presentation of a dummy application, obviously not the real one, I'm just going to start off at quite a high level. And so what I've done now, I've gone out of PowerPoint. I'm now in the web application. I'm in UniPhi, and I'm looking at a red, amber, green dashboard. And there's lots of this is actually the presentation layer of this is Power BI. It interfaces directly into UniPhi, and it's embedded within our application. And lots of Power BI presentations going around the place now. And if it's not Power BI, it could still be an Excel presentation where you've got red, amber, green ratings on a spreadsheet. And the question always is, okay, so how did that color come about? And what's driving it from being green to yellow or yellow to red? And that's where the breakdown normally comes at this level. So it's great. Executive can have a look straight down the portfolio. We've got a stack of projects coming down this list, and we've got an idea of how they're tracking, managing RFIs from contractors, managing their budget, any safety issues, managing time and risks. And you can add to that an endless list of RAG statuses that you wish. What's the difference in this environment is that from this very high level of an aggregated metric that's giving you a color, you can very quickly drill down into the detail and get specific types of information. So, you can highlight one of these projects and focus on it through this ability to click, or you could just filter down to a specific project that you thought was warranting greater look. And by filtering it here, what's going to happen is that all the other tabs that you can see down the bottom of the screen will filter down as well. And so we're looking at this Mirvac Cherrybrook Village Shopping Centre here, and you can see that outside of a really great safety record, they're struggling. And to see the RFI information, I can click on the RFI tab and change this timeline. And it'll basically update with a whole bunch of dashboards that are more detailed on that particular project. And you can see the number of RFIs being raised, the source from those RFIs, some from the client, some from the contractor over time, and who's got the current assignment of those RFIs, who are they with. And then you say, okay, that's good, that's interesting, but I know that this Megan Visser, she's always a bit slow on the uptake, she doesn't get through it. And so what you can do is you can drill through on that, and if I drill through onto that to get the details of Megan's RFI, it now goes into that detail, tells me that there's a delay in the receipt of a concept design, and that's leading to requests for variation. And to find out even more information on that, I can click this little paperclip here, and it takes me directly into the issue detail. Once I'm in this issue detail, you'll see there's a stack of metadata getting captured around this particular issue. We have the category, we have who logged it, when it was logged, who's it assigned to, when it's due, its rating, it's been escalated, it's linked to a project completion milestone, so as the due date goes out, that milestone will go out. We have a bunch of actions with due dates. We haven't assigned those actions, so it's going to be pretty hard for them to get done. And the source and external reference, and if I'm managing it via a workflow template, a whole bunch of other pieces of metadata. And then as I scroll down, you can then start to see that there is more and more information. There's people commenting. You can see Bernard's commenting about how good he looked in the snow. And so you can upload photos into there. If they've got GPS references, that'll get stripped out. You can see that Yoda, Jane Smith, is adding her 2 cents worth. And then you can also see one of those other interfaces I mentioned before where you can pull in emails directly into the application. And so even if a person doesn't have access to the application, we can still capture their commentary by pulling their emails into the tool. And as you'll see later, all of this is really rich metadata description around what caused that RFI. And that can go on for as long as that RFI takes to close. And there's many comments back and forth, either via email, via in-field data capture in an app, or via person logging it directly in here through the add comments section and attaching files and doing what they need to do. You'll also see on the right-hand side any related documents and other attachments, but also the valuation. And so a QS or a PM can put an assessment of possible variation against that. And that's actually going against the contract. And so if I click that variation, I'm now in the contract that this is impacting on. It's an early works contract. This is the structure of the contract, the original sum, and then there's a list of variations here. And there's the delay in receipt of concept design with its $2,000, which if I change this view to issues, will give me the reference back to that particular issue that we were managing. And so delay in receipt of concept design. So the system is two-way communicating with itself so that you can always track back to where you started and drill back down again to the detail and follow that information. We started off about 10 minutes ago in a conversation, maybe 5, about aggregated RAG ratings and why this project was going a little bit astray. And within a couple of clicks, we'd interrogated down to specific issues with commentary, actions, and what was going on. And it's that depth of data that we believe is crucially important. There's not much point having a portfolio layer when that's all it is, and the data sources are coming from Excel feeds that don't have any conversations behind them, don't have any real interrogation capability as to why that's being reported. And when you think that a lot of that data is going to get massaged along the way to try and manage the stakeholders upwards to make them understand that things are going to get better without potentially any plans in place to make that happen. I mean, equally within this environment, all of this contract data is updating the costs. So I can also just jump to the cost module within UniPhi and get an update on that cost and where the variances might be coming against that particular project and its particular cost breakdown structure. And so again, very quickly, high level, I can get real-time valid information about that project. Heading back to the dashboards now, that basically makes its way through all of those tabs. So if I go to risks, you'll get a similar type scenario. Might just clear out the Mervac project because it's a little bit light on risks in the dummy database. And so what you get there is a portfolio risk dashboard view. This is looking at how many risks have been and what their rating is over time, which is always a good one. I like this one in terms of, risks are escalating because you're getting more and more of them over time. And this again is the untreated rating over time of risks. This is how they're classified. And again, there's that drill through factor. So if I right mouse button on my FOIA upgrade at Collins Street, I can drill through to the risk details. This is the FOIA upgrade. This is its risk register and its untreated and treated risks, which again, I can click on a link there and go straight in and get much more detail around that particular risk, including an incredibly difficult step to mitigate there. Must have been a child that added that one. And any, again, commentary that's been coming in from people around the business on what they're doing about treating that particular risk. Cash flow information can be drawn out of the tool into this high level and again drilled into the actual transactions that make it up. Project cost, performance, that's not so good, that one there. And again, we get this ability to interrogate that information. So this particular donut here is where the variations are coming from. So most of the variations are latent conditions, 171,000. Again, the same logic takes place. I right mouse button on that. I can then drill through and get the list of variations that make up that $171,000 and see what they are made up of. I could also add the paperclip link into those issues and into the contract there, which doesn't exist on this dashboard at this point in time, but that capability is there for the end user to do that through their report designing. And so, a bunch of different types of dashboards. The sort of breadth of the information that we're covering here is the main purpose of what I'm trying to demonstrate. You can see across the top, we've got other report viewer engines that have been built for other presentations, and just giving you a sort of sample on that. Clicking on the one called major projects, we get a dashboard that tries to show that, again, that breadth of information. We have a safety graph over here around life-threatening injuries and minor reportable injuries and how many over time. Some benchmarking data, geographical representation of hours being booked to projects. And if I hover, it'll tell me how many. And so 26,000 in Sydney, and how many projects I've got from different sectors, how many issues I've got in different categories, how many risks I've got in different categories, and what tasks are getting booked to the most, and that sort of thing. So you can build as many and as varied and as broad type representation or information as you like. It's a milestone map around different types of projects, education, residential, and retail. Further benchmarking data, more detailed around floor area rates and efficiencies and things like that. So all of that data is coming from real bottom level information. On a benchmarking sense, we'll pull data from Costex or from Excel or Cato or other benchmark estimating platforms directly into the application. to capture that portfolio data. Each of these dots represents a project. So wherever the timeline milestones can come from MS Project or P6 schedules, and you can synchronize your lifecycle dates around that. So this is the unifying nature of that distributed data capture that we're trying to basically enable people to then interrogate and track and monitor, starting with those RAG ratings and then drilling into the detail as to why they're going astray. So going back to my presentation for a moment and just focusing on that case study. This is some of the data that we were able to get. This was in a 12-month period from November 2018 to October 2019. And during that period, they initiated 339 projects. Now, in UniPhi, the way we structured that was that they were parent projects and they had 3 design stage children and then a delivery stage as well. So there were 4 stages underneath. For each of the design stages, the team, very optimal easing Sydney congestion design team, a very high performing team, 150 design engineers working and collaborating together, doing amazing things. And they, early days in the program, had developed a automated or sort of standardized process of moving through these stages. So they developed 12 major steps, and within those steps, there was like 6 steps each. And then they would comment on their progress on those steps. And they'd also log design issues. And then when it went to post-contract, they'd log RFI questions coming back from the contractor and track their resolution on that. When you do that with 125 FTE or 150 people, you quickly build 291,000 distinct data points in your database within a 12-month period that you can use and analyze. What happens around that, though, is that those data points in the activities module have a whole bunch of other metadata wrapped around them. That project has people assigned to them. Those people belong to organizations. They have roles like, geotech and traffic and things like that. They have hours that they're booking to that activity. They have rates that book to that activity. There's a cost associated to that activity. So there's all these extra bits of metadata that's wrapped around those 291,000 data points. When you add those elements in, we had 582 million combinations of data. And the average words per activity was 20, so you could pull out 5.8 million words from that system. And why would you want to pull out 5.8 million words from that system? Well, if I jump into this Power BI visualization and just blow it up a little bit, this is a rough attempt at trying to explain what it is that we're trying to achieve with that type of thing. So the essential thing first is that you get end users, 150 people actively using the system and wanting to put data into the system. And why did they want to do that? Because it actually helped them turn around an RFI question or a design issue that they had to resolve or drive through the program from concept through to delivery. And so they actively used it. That gave us those data points. Now, each of these lines in here represents how many times a word appears. Now, it's dummy presentation database and it hasn't been overly cleaned, but for example, UniPhi in our presentation database you use 21 times. Training is there, webinars there, I think somewhere in there, my name is there. So you basically have got a count of how many times a word comes up. And then what you can do with that is you can pattern match that. So if a particular word like site is in here a lot, and it happens to be associated on all of the issues, the RFIs that took longer, could be water, is in here a lot, and it's associated with all the RFIs that took longer to resolve because we know how long it takes to resolve the RFIs. We've got a date open and a date closed, and automated duration on that, and that dashboard that I showed before represents that in the RFI tracking. If we're pattern matching that, then we might spot that water is creating, any water related issue is creating an extension and a time delay on resolving RFIs. And then you can dig further into why that might be, and a human gets involved in that. But those sorts of algorithms and those sorts of machine learning type things are able to be put in place now because we've got that level of data. Without big data, you can't really do AI. If you look at a Tesla car and it's supposed to be self-driving, the only way that is that every time you drive it, it's sending information back to Tesla to teach the giant brain how people drive in different locations and under different conditions. And so that's what we're trying to simulate in this environment. And that's why UniPhi is such a broad application to unify data, to try and engage not just project managers, program managers, portfolio managers, but the people on the ground, the engineers, the surveyors, the cost managers, the people who are actually inputting into the implementation of that project. See how much I'd use PowerPoint these days. I can't remember how to start from the specific slide. So what's the implications of that now from a project controls perspective? You can easily see through those visualizations the number of times the date changes, the variations per RFI and the comments per RFI and the cost per activity or per other class of metadata. You can benchmark durations and feedback loops yourself visually through the Power BI interfaces and the analytics of that. Artificial intelligence, things like word pattern matching, using past performance to predict future performance, starting to look at optimal portfolio selection algorithms where you use resource constraints and outcomes required to try and optimize what type of mix of resources you need. And equally, data cleansing and data improvement where we can match the amount of timesheet data put to projects versus the task activity to see if people are actually timesheeting accurately and see if we can improve that process over time. So what that means is new technologies like UniPhi basically allow for live connections to distributed data systems. You see it in the social media platforms, the amount of data that Facebook and Twitter and other platforms can harvest. This is a similar type thing, but in a more controlled environment. It's around targeted activities and issues and structuring the way people work, but equally encouraging them to capture as much information. So the goal is to have deep data sets. We need to streamline the collection of that activity. It can't go through a number of extraction, transform, and load processes. It needs to be streamlined. If you enable sort of fuzzy or friction bits between the way it gets from the end user in the field to the program manager or CEO in the dashboard, then you've got it open to corruption. And I don't mean personal. I just mean that the data could get flawed in some way, shape, or form. And that's why closed systems slow down data collection. If you've got a P6 or an Excel or Costex, they tend to be closed systems. They're deep and they're useful for certain things, but the challenge with those systems is to get the data out and then to be able to align it to what's actually happening in the field. It's very unusual for a P6 schedule to actually align to the activity that actually occurred as people adapted to scenarios on the ground on a day-to-day basis. And so I think over time, those closed systems will become less relevant and, these open architecture, open interfaces, mass data sets that enable us to analyze will become more prevalent. Just one thing on the security of UniPhi before I sort of wrap up for questions and the like. It's been asked of me now, so getting these different views, how do you control what people can see? And so what I just want to do is just take you through a little bit of that as well. And so this is the portfolio summary view of that data that we were looking at in the dashboards. And it's listing all the projects that, that exist in this portfolio. The person's logged in is myself under the pseudonym of Joe Blogs. I'm a system administrator and I can see and do everything. I'm the all singing, all dancing very badly, Joe Blogs. And so when I look at this list, you can see it's a very, very, very long list. And just as an aside, that's an example of the structure that we're used at Easing Sydney Congestion, where you have a road section and it has its life cycle that it's going to go through. And they're the children projects in there. So that's me logged in as everything and able to do everything. And I've got lots of buttons here and all the rest of it. If I was to go to Firefox, so I'm accessing this in Chrome, I can mimic being a different user. And so I've come into Firefox and I'm in the same URL. I'm in the portfolio summary screen. But you can see that there's no buttons. There's a square just next to one project. I'll explain what that means in a minute. All the modules are the same along the top here. So I've got access to all the modules. But when I click this list here, it's not as big. It's still quite big on a lot of projects, but it's nowhere near as big. And if I come over here and click this little portfolio filtering over here, you'll see that it's just allowing me to see my portfolio. So in essence, I'm logged in as Bernard, I'll show you in a moment, and here's a project manager access. So there's Bernard. He's actually having a little sleep at the moment. I don't know if you can see that, but he's sleeping over there, Bernard, sleeping on the job. But he has limitations in the system, but that limitation is quite sophisticated. For example, on this Charters Tower, the reason he's got a square there, that actually means that he can do some stuff on that project broader than just maybe you're adding comments and responding to issues. And so in this example, he can change the life cycle phase, but he can't do it on any of these projects. So when he goes into that Charters Towers, he has all of the edit details that belong to that particular project. Whereas if I go into one of the others, like records management, it just gives me the summary information of that project. I can't change anything on that particular metadata. So the way that gets set up is, okay, he's got project manager subscription. He's allowed to do budgets and contracts and stuff, but only on projects where he's in a role that enables him to do that. So each project has a resources profile, and you can set up and say, okay, there's Bernard. Cost managers are allowed to manage budgets, surprisingly. And so he's in the role of cost manager, whereas on all the other projects, he's obviously not. He might be in the team member role. And if you're in the team member role, then all you can really do is respond to your issues that you've been assigned, close them out, timesheet, look at documents, view documents, that sort of thing. And so, you know, what they can see and what they can do will change. And sort of another example of that from a, using this potentially as, say, a client portal and having someone log in and view their client related data. If I look at all projects that go to this construction breakdown structure, we've got total budget of 21.7 million. So that's the budget that is for that particular client, in this instance, Bernard. If I go into my Joe Bloggs view of the world and I look at this construction, I have 38 million. So you can see the numbers are different, and the numbers are different because I'm seeing everything and Bernard is seeing only the things that he should see. And so that number dynamically changes. You don't need to manage it, you don't need to massage it, it's just there. And then there's another view. This view is Yoda Jane, and she is a team member. And so the first thing you'll note about that is that across the top here, there's no cost, there's no contracts, there's no revenue, there's no feasibility modules for Jane to work in. So she can't do anything around managing that type of information. There's no summary page. It's just, this is what you need to do as a team member. Jane, you need to be doing these tasks. Filter for the ones that you're on, and you'll see yours, and start doing stuff. And so if I go in, I can see the actions. I can't change any of those dates. You would have seen up there. They're all grayed out, but I can read them. And I've got the comments here, and I've got related documents, which I can click in and see. And again, that can be configured. You might not want team members to see variation, contract sum adjustments. You can configure that to not be able to be seen by Jane. And so, there's a very sophisticated third-party role model within the application that users can tailor and tweak to their particular requirements. And I think that's quite important. When you've got distributed data capture at so many levels, you want to apply your governance, you want to apply your security models, and you want to make sure that people are seeing only the things they should be seeing. And that capability is there. So that shouldn't be stopping us from, basically getting that distributed data that we want out of the system. So that's the overview. There is a chat function if you wanted to ask a question, or you can unmute yourself and ask.